Hey there, folks. Episode 14 of the Because I'm Carlos podcast. And we're at the end of November. As promised, at the very beginning when I started doing these audio versions, I said that it would be just on whatever cadence is when I came up with something. And what kind of led me down the path of this episode is not any particular specific thing hobby wise. It was actually a card that came in. Mail is a little bit slow right now because a lot of it is just starting to pile up at Ship My Cards. So I'm probably going to have another big mail day or two before the end of the year. We'll definitely see how that plays out. But I have been getting some fun stuff in. And it was Jamie Benn 2011-12 Titanium Game Gear. It was a patch card, and it'll be in the pickup video for the week. The card itself, though, isn't really as important as it is that it's a Jamie Benn card, and it's a secondary player collection that I have. And actually, I was thinking about that a little bit. I have talked about the whole player collection thing a little bit here and there. And also, I did an episode earlier on where I talked about the whole idea of seasons in the hobby and things like that. So that was an earlier episode. But the other thing that I was thinking about when I thought about this is that this card in particular is part of a recent run of some Jamie Benn cards that I've been picking up, and that is one of my secondary player PCs. So right now, at the moment, for those that are less familiar, Mike Medano is my main player PC, and that is what is on my Instagram and all those places. And I've got my secondary PCs, which is Jamie Benn, and then to a certain degree, Juan Soto. And part of what also led me down thinking about this a little bit more is that I'm starting to do my own research. And yes, at the end of November, I'm starting to dig into the channel and starting to put together some of the stuff that's going to be at the year-end review. So before I get into the main topic a little bit more here, I really want to quickly say that just as a heads up, I'm going to be doing the same 3 videos for year end that I did last year, which is one that's going to be kind of a channel year in review. That's the one that I'm starting to do some informational, fact finding on. And then the second one is going to be my favorite pickups of the year, which of course leads me down to thinking about some of this stuff. And then the last one is going to be the goals video. And all 3 of those kind of play into what I'm talking about right now, which is lately, especially if you saw my video that I did on the YouTube channel, Because I'm Carlos YouTube channel, I did the pickups from the Toronto Fall Expo, and they were pretty Jamie Benn heavy. So that goes again into this theme. But what I thought I would take a couple of minutes to talk about is how we evolved on my collecting to the point of having that secondary player PC. And I do recommend that for folks, especially who are player collectors, to have a little bit of a secondary PC because it can get a little bit daunting being tunnel vision all the time and consistently focusing on the same project. But that can also apply to you if you're a set collector or if you're collecting different kinds of things. It's nice to have a little bit of a diversion there. How you want to define that is really up to you, and also how you want to basically categorize the two, what ratio you want to put to those is something that is part of the flexibility that I've always enjoyed about player collecting. You don't have to collect everything for every player that you collect. You can be a little bit pickier. That's what I've done with the Jamie Benn, but I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on how we evolved to this point. Now, specifically, when it came to a lot of my player collecting, Medano has been the constant through a long time. And I've mentioned before on the channel in various iterations that I've been collecting Mike Medano since 1995. But during the time period that I have been collecting Medano, there's been a little bit of a revolving door as far as secondary player PCs. The Jamie Benn one has been pretty consistent for the last couple of years, but before that, there were a couple of others that I was collecting. Initially, one that actually predates my Mike Medano player collection is that in the earlier part of the 90s, I was actually player collecting Joe Carter. And since I'm over in the area of the Toronto Blue Jays and you had the back-to-back World Series championships, and I'm a baseball fan first and foremost, it made a lot of sense that I would enjoy picking up cards of, the World Series hero, Joe Carter. And it gave a little bit of variety early on in those times where I was able to look for a couple of different kinds of cards. And I wasn't just collecting the Blue Jay ones. I was also collecting some of his Cleveland Indians stuff. I have his rookie cards still in a box somewhere. I still have these cards, and at some point I may do a little showcase of them. They're not nearly as exciting as some of the other player collections because a lot of Joe Carter's stuff, through the 80s, you've got a lot of food issues and stuff like that, a lot of very interesting little things here and there. Some quirky stuff, but for the most part, not as, the variety isn't quite there because a lot of that is junk wax era stuff. And then when we get into the early and mid 90s, it gets a little bit more interesting. Joe Carter retired at the end of the 90s, so he is in some stuff in there, but I never really was able to be too aggressive with it. But that was one of the earliest player collections I had. And then the Medano and Carter collection kind of were going on around the same time. I started with Carter first, but then once I started collecting Medano in the 90s, it took, front seat. And then the Joe Carter one took a little bit of a back seat, but I was still collecting it for a while. But then after that, I started kind of fading off the Joe Carter one because it just wasn't as interesting for me to pursue some of the stuff that was missing in between. And I started looking for another suitable secondary player collection to have, even though I kept the Carter cards. And I went through a little bit of a revolving door of a couple different ones. For a little while, I was picking up, and a lot of times when I would do these player collections, it would start off with me accumulating a certain number of cards, and then kind of playing out around with it to see how I felt about it. And most of them would last a couple of months or maybe a year or so, and not a lot of them stuck very well. I did for a little period of time collect some Luke Robitaille cards, and I had some fun with that. And I picked up some decent cards for Robitaille, and then eventually divested myself of most of them. One that I still have sitting in one of the boxes was I picked up a bunch of Marion Hossa stuff. So for a while, that was the secondary player PC, just because I was having a little bit of fun with that. But one of the reoccurring themes, aside from the Joe Carter one, that I would look for in a secondary one is one that I would try to pick a player that wasn't necessarily something that I was going to be focusing too much on, but that would offer me some kind of variety or maybe something interesting that I could have a little bit of fun with. And most of the time, those fit the bill. The Jamie Benn one has stuck pretty well, and then the Juan Soto one is the most recent, but that's because I have a very, very narrow scope in kind of the stuff that I'm looking for Juan Soto. And playing into that whole bit that I talked about where I said that you have a lot of flexibility, I pretty much pick up the Juan Soto cards that interest me. There's some stuff that goes into a Z folio, but for the most part, I'm kind of looking for stuff that fits a certain aesthetic. If I like the card, then it's interesting for me and I'll add it. I'm under no pressure or any obligation to really go pick up anything more than that. And I can kind of pick and choose when I'm interested in wading into those waters. That's why it works very well as a player collection. Now, the Jamie Benn one is a little bit more logical than a lot of these other ones that were kind of a little bit random. I kind of pick and choose some stuff that I thought was kind of interesting. But the Jamie Benn one made a little bit more sense because when Jamie Benn was coming up initially, he had a good connection with Modano in the sense that Modano's last year in Dallas was Jamie Benn's first year in Dallas. And I did get a chance to see him play a little bit for the Texas Star in the AHL. So there was a little bit of a passing of the torch, and Jamie Benn became, captain of the Dallas Stars. So he kind of followed in that tradition with Brendan Morrow kind of being in between him and Modano. So it worked out very nicely. There was, with Brendan Morrow, was a bit of a bridge between the two eras. It was kind of fun to see the development. So these are three of the four main Dallas Star captains during their franchise history. So from that perspective, it made a little bit more of a logical pick than some of these other ones that I already named off. But an important thing that happened with a little bit of the evolution part, and that's kind of the overarching theme of the majority of the story. It's a little bit more story time-ish than a lot of the other ones. A lot of them have a more clear-cut theme, but here's a little bit of a thread with it. It's that you do have to be fluid. You do have to understand that your collecting is going to go in ebbs and flows, and it is going to adjust over time. And you can really pick up a collection for any reason. And then what you got to do, though, as you go along is what I find really works well is you have to try to find something that not only piques your interest, but something that you can find your little challenges and fun things in between to make it more sustainable over time. The Jamie Benn collection still provides me some interest. Obviously, it goes in ebbs and flows. There are periods of time where I won't pick up a single card, but lately I've been on a bit of a kick because I've been able to be really aggressive as far as finding some really interesting stuff and cool stuff to add to that segment of the collection for a relatively low price. So for me, it's become kind of a fun game to what's the coolest card I can find for a nice, bargain hunting price. And that plays a little bit into the whole evolution of that player collection so this is probably the one that made the most logical sense, like I said. So another Dallas Star captain to follow in the lineage. And he even had a great run there where he was, on the rise, and then eventually became scoring champion, and even had another season that was even better than the year where he won the scoring championship. It was a little bit of a down year, but hardware is hardware; it still counts. But as I began the process of trying to figure out what I wanted to do as far as a collection is concerned, I decided to start off very narrow. I began with the idea, toying around with the idea of, okay, so why don't I go and try to first put together a collection of all his rookie cards from 2009-10. Let me go look through a couple of different ones there and see if I can put together all the rookie cards. And obviously the big rookie card for that one is the Cup version, the Cup patch autograph. So I was able to get my hands on that. I went on quite a buying spree and picked up all the different ones. And then I thought, okay, once I did that, I said, okay, well, I've managed to do all this and pick these up. Let me kind of expand it out a little bit and let me go after all the stuff from his rookie year, because it turned out his checklist for all his rookie year stuff was right about 100 cards, which to me seemed like a very nice figure. And it still left room for a lot of very interesting stuff. Now, as always with my player collections, I remove the one of ones because as far as I'm concerned, there's no point in having them on your checklist. Realistically, would I go and pick up a one of one? Certainly. But, I either have it or I don't. I don't really need to have it on a checklist. It's redundant at that point. So outside of the one of ones, that still left about 100 cards on the checklist. And I thought, okay, this may be kind of interesting. So I started making progress on that and aggressively moved after that. Now, as time went on, the supply, obviously there's only 100 cards. I think I have 67 or 68 of them. I have to go look at my checklist again. I have 67 or 68 of the 100 cards or so. It might be 101, but regardless, I have most of the ones that I need for that particular subsection. So it started to expand my horizons a little bit. I have a Z Folio for some Jamie Benn stuff, just some fun, cool cards that are enjoyable for me, similar to what I do with Juan Soto. But then the focus became, okay, let me see what other cool cards of Jamie Benn that I can pick up. And those ones have been kind of the focus of a lot of my recent pickups, including, like I said, that Fall Expo stuff. That was not rookie year stuff. And part of my deal that I made with my buddy there, who was set up at the table, was that he was more than happy to move on with some of the non-rookie card stuff for a relatively low price. It's one of those things that's like, yeah, I'll take a whole bunch off. If you want to take these off my hands, just take them away. And we were able to come to a deal that was workable for both of us. And that was kind of the fun of it, is that it's okay, what kind of cool cards can I find for Jamie Benn in this category? Because the rookie year stuff, unfortunately, is still priced. As his career has kind of been declining and his numbers have been slowly dropping. The rookie year stuff has kind of tried to hold price wise, or at least people are being stubbornly and holding on to trying to get the prices that they would have been able to get maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. And unfortunately, they're not going to get it. So the amount of available stuff that fits in that checklist for his rookie year that I might otherwise be interested in, I'm kind of priced out of. Not because I can't afford it, because in relative terms, even though it's more expensive than I would like it to be, it's still pretty reasonable. Like equivalent Medanos would cost me a lot more, and obviously equivalent Sotos would cost me way more than that. But nonetheless, I have to look at what value I place on it. And the answer is not a lot. So I'm almost having to bargain hunt even for the rookie year stuff. And unfortunately, the sellers are not biting on that particular philosophy. We're not in alignment. But having all that non-rookie card stuff to chase, where I can be a lot pickier and I can say, okay, I'm looking for just some really cool stuff to add, has allowed me to pick up some really fun cards that I enjoy picking up and looking at that cost me a fraction. And that to me has really become the value of the secondary player collection, is offering me those opportunities to have variety, and it's self-imposed variety. You don't really have to do it that way, and you can pick and choose what categories and what restrictions you want to put on it. You can try to collect everything for every player you collect if you want, but you can also narrow down the focus quite a bit. You can collect a bunch of secondary player PCs, or you can have one or two. I prefer to stick to one or two, and I prefer to have a narrow focus on those, because the Medano collection on the whole keeps me pretty busy, and I have some vintage projects I'm working on and some insert sets that I'm doing. I don't want to be pursuing too many projects at the same time, and that's a theme that I've definitely touched on the channel a number of different times. Bottom line is, though, that as I go along, the evolution initially started off just wanting the rookies, then rookie year cards, then, some Z Folio stuff, and then some cool cards outside of rookie. And right now where I'm sitting at this point in time is I'm looking at some consolidation options. I may move on from a lot of the rookie year stuff. And because if there's any value left in it at all, I'd rather kind of, convert that over and maybe pick up some other pieces, even Jamie Benn pieces that are non-rookie year that are available for pennies on the dollar, relatively speaking. And that whole evolutionary step is trying to, curate the collection and make it into something that interests you, or something that you enjoy. And as I went along that process, I had to learn by experiencing and by doing what it is that made the most sense for me. I'm still interested in picking up Jamie Benn cards. Like I said, the thing that precipitated this entire conversation was a new Jamie Benn card that I purchased from eBay and got in the mail. And I've got a couple more really nice ones that are going to be coming in, and that'll be part of a fun mail day. The point is, though, is that as I've gone along, my focus and how narrow and how wide I've gone with it has changed. And a lot of that has been out of just understanding better what it is that interests me, what it is that I enjoy, and what it is that makes it fun for me. And that's really what has always been the benefit of taking advantage and occasionally taking stock of what you're doing and learning from it, rather than just, blindly continuing down a path, past the point it's interesting to you. So that's what's always kept stuff like that fresh for me. Evolving those different player collections also was part of that evolutionary process. The Medano collection stayed consistent, but those other ones rotated through. The Jamie Benn one I think is going to stick because I've been doing it now for several years, and to be honest, it's still enjoyable. But specifically what I'm looking for has changed, and as that's gone on, it's provided me with a much more clear vision of what I would like that section of the collection to look like. And that's never a bad thing. So that's kind of the main part of this particular episode that I wanted to talk about. I just wanted to kind of talk through some of the thoughts I've been having with it and the direction, and gave a little bit of a backstory on some other player collections that I started and stopped, and then how I ended up with the current state of the Jamie Benn collection. The future, as I said, maybe some consolidation, moving on from some of the pieces that don't interest me anymore and leaving a room for a much tighter, more cohesive, and more interesting version of that collection. I will continue proceeding forward, and it'll be fun to see what that looks like in the next year, in the next coming years as well. Now, I'm going to finish up with one more thing. Now, really quickly, as I go along, I always say this right at the end, but I'll put it here for a second. If there's any comments or statements in it, if you're checking it out on the YouTube version of it, feel free to leave it in the comments. I always appreciate any comments or suggestions on the podcast. If there's any topics or anything you'd like me to talk about or consider, I would love to have that as well. So I'll happily take the feedback. But as I finish up here, one of the other things I was thinking about, and this will be kind of how I'll conclude this episode, is I started doing my own digging into the channel itself. I already mentioned at the beginning kind of what I have in mind as far as the 3 episodes that I'm going to have for sure. But part of the other aspect of it is as I start putting together all the different aspects of the channel and the way the year's gone, it struck me as very interesting. It kind of put me in a reflective state as well. The state of the channel in that this year easily surpassed anything I've ever done on the channel as far as output. When I'm recording this will be the 163rd piece of content that I would have put out in the year 2021. And you're not hearing incorrectly. And that's not a typo on my piece of paper here. 162 prior to this, including videos, including, podcast episodes, audio versions like this, including the live streams. It's just now, to be fair, a good chunk of that, at least once a week, is pickup videos. And obviously, those are consistent. Those are always a video per week. But then we add in a live stream and we add in other videos interspersed in between and, breaking news stuff as certain things have happened this year in the hobby, quite a number of things. It's going to make for a very interesting end of the year retrospective. I'm certainly not going to cover even a fraction of the amount of stuff that we went over. But I will say it was shocking to myself to see just how much stuff there was. And I pulled some stats based on that, and I think it'll be a lot of fun. I think there'll be some eyebrows raised when people realize this, with how much stuff there really is. I had no sense of it, and I did it. So it made it very, very surprising and very interesting to me. But it'll be a fun review. But it means definitely, even at the end of November, I need to start planning for that right now. So I'm definitely not early on that. I need to start working on it so that over the next couple of weeks I can have something ready for the end of the year and we can finish strong. Outside of that, that's it for this one. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts of this. If you are a player collector yourself, do you have any secondary player PCs? That's something I'd be curious about. If so, how do you approach it compared to your primary? Do you do it differently? Do you try to collect everything for both? Do you, split your, resources that way? Or do you try to be a little bit pickier? Do you have a more narrow focus on that? If you're a set collector, you certainly could be somebody who maybe collects certain types of sets. Do you venture off into other sports? Like there's a lot of different ways that you can divert and have like a secondary thing that you do as well. It doesn't have to be narrowly, but obviously player collection is the one that I know the best. And it's the one that I've been at the most. So those are just some thoughts from me, some more videos, and there should be 1 or 2 more audio podcasts before the year is out. I'm definitely thinking about some other topics and things, but as I said, I'm open to suggestions, and if you've got any of that would be more than welcome. If you are checking it out on the YouTube version, if you could like the video, that would be very appreciated. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and you can check out all the social medias in the description of either version. That's it for now. Thanks very much. We'll catch you in the next one.